Hello everybody, my name is JoyofCrimeArt. It seems like independent animation has really exploded over the last couple of years. I wonder why. It truly is amazing to see how far indie animation has come in such a relatively short amount of time. However, the success of some of the larger independent web projects out there can often distract from the fact that for every pilot that blows up the internet and becomes a massive phenomenon, there are many more that aren't so lucky. For every amazing digital circus is 100 fistmasters. That's why I wanted to use this time to highlight a pilot that, while still having a bit of a cult following, I feel it's kind of slipped under a lot of people's radar, at least compared to a lot of the other indie projects out there. And that pilot is none other than Ongezellig. Ongezellig is a 23-minute Dutch indie animation pilot created by Studio Massa, which isn't actually a studio at all, it's just one guy. Studio Massa just happens to be the name of his YouTube channel, not to be confused with his two side channels, also called Studio Massa. Oh, it's gonna be one of those videos, isn't it? Prior to Ongezellig, Studio Massa was mainly known for making short YouTube animations based around Dutch history, as well as a webcomic titled Mayo and Curry, so he had experience when it came to writing and animation, though admittedly not to quite the same magnitude as a fully animated indie pilot. But despite that, Studio Massa was unperturbed, and from 2018 to 2023 released the pilot in 6 parts. Initially the pilot went well, with the video containing the first 2 parts garnering over 1 million views, but after that views began to kind of just taper off, with the series never seeming to blow up the same way a lot of other indie animated series did. Which is a shame because Ongezellig is probably one of the best indie pilots I've ever seen. Like, I'm not saying that it's better than the likes of, say, The Amazing Digital Circus, Hello a Boss, Lackadaisy, and Long Gone Gulch, but IMDb says it is. I think this series deserves more love, which is what I want to share with all of you today. So let's dive in and talk about Ongezellig, an underrated indie cult classic. Ongezellig follows the day-to-day lives of 3 adopted teenage sisters, Maya, Coco, and Mymy, with the pilot focusing on the 3 being forced to work together on a history report after all 3 botched their own individual efforts. It's a simple premise, but I think that's a good thing, as it lets us get a good glimpse of what an average episode of the show would be like if it were turned into a full series. And because the plot is so bare bones, it allows for more time to focus on what's most important, in this case being the characters and their relationship with each other. Our main lead is Maya, a bitter, cynical, horny teenage girl who suffers from a crippling case of social anxiety, causing her to be completely unable to communicate with anyone around her. You know, this character reminds me of someone. Oh yeah! Komi from Komi Can't Communicate. Yeah, so Maya shares a lot of similarities with the main character of another series I talked about on this channel before, that being Tomoko Kuroki from the anime/manga series Watamote. In fact, Ongezellig and Watamote share a lot of similarities in general, from the tone, the style of comedy, to heck, even the OST. Like, you can't fool me, that's a Watamote score!
Poging die ik doe, maak ik het mezelf alleen maar erger. Nee, echt, ik ben niet eens metaforisch aan het doen, ik zit echt vast.
I don't know if Studio Massa has ever confirmed that Watamote was the inspiration behind the series, but like, come on now. I wasn't born yesterday.
They're the same picture.
So the question becomes, is Ongezellig just a ripoff of Watamote? Kinda, not really. It's complicated. While the series are ostensibly similar, I think Ongezellig still manages to stand out just enough to stand on its own. Like, take Maya for instance. While Maya and Tomoko seem very similar on the surface, there are a few differences between them. For one, Maya has a lot more common sense. She's not out here pulling any harebrained schemes in order to become popular like Tomoko is. She's a lot more resigned to her status as a social outcast, either believing that it's something outside of her control, or convincing herself that she's actually better off being alone, as opposed to Tomoko who, despite everything, was ultimately an optimist who believed that her social anxiety was a problem that she could overcome with enough hard work. And while Tomoko's social anxiety was bad, she was at the very least able to communicate relatively easily with her family, which isn't the case for Maya, who still very much views her adopted sisters as outsiders. Maya is also a worse person than Tomoko is. Like, I don't want to get into spoilers because I want to encourage you to check the pilot out for yourself, but there are some things she does here that are honestly pretty heinous. And while that may turn some people off and cause Maya to come off as too unlikable for some, I think it works because it opens up so much potential for possible character development that could occur in future stories. So that's the main difference between Maya and Tomoko. Maya's worse.
Dear God.
Plus, outside of Maya, none of the other characters have any real similarities to the rest of the Watamote cast. So yeah, while the two series are similar in a lot of ways, I wouldn't call Ongezellig a Watamote ripoff. Though it is definitely heavily Watamote inspired. But hey, Watamote is one of my favorite things, so I'll give it a pass. Speaking of characters though, we also have Maya's two adopted sisters. We have Coco, a supportive, relaxed, ditzy girl who Maya has grown a resentment towards due to her being more popular and overall well-adjusted than she is. And we have Mymy, an overzealous and power-hungry Dutch nationalist. You know, that common character archetype. You relate to Maya because you have social anxiety. I relate to Mymy because I believe the Dutch are the rightful owners of Indonesia. We are not the same. Mymy is mostly just there for comic relief, and honestly her psychotic nature is just really funny to me. Though I have no idea how these jokes play if you're actually from the Netherlands, let alone one of their former colonies. But on the topic, I figured now would be a good time as any to introduce my new OC, the South will Rise Again Chan. Honestly, I really enjoy all three characters. They have a fun dynamic with each other, where just watching them bounce off each other is enough to be captivating, which I think is a good sign for any cast of characters. I also want to call out the voice acting here. It's pretty impressive, especially considering the fact that, as far as I can tell, none of these actresses seem to have much other voice roles under their belt besides Ongezellig. But all three actresses do a really good job. Their voices all fit the characters really well, with Maya's voice being low and gravelly, Coco's being soft and gentle, and Mymy's being high-pitched and manic. Another thing I really like about Ongezellig is the cultural aspect. Ongezellig makes no attempt to hide its Dutch influence. If this pilot were any more Dutch, it would be eating its prime minister. There's also little references to Dutch history and culture sprinkled throughout. I mean, even the series title, Ongezellig, doesn't have a direct English equivalent. Translating to not gezellig, gezellig being a Dutch term for a cozy hanging out with friends. But the references never become too much to where it becomes hard to follow as an outsider. Not only that, but despite the series taking place in the Netherlands, all three of our leads actually hail from a different country. Coco being from South Africa, Maya being from Belgium,
Brabant.
and Mymy being from Japan. Three distinct cultures that are also connected to the Netherlands in some way, either as a former colony, a neighbor, or a historical trading partner. This is taken even further with Maya, who despite being a Belgian living in the Netherlands is confirmed by the creator to be a mix of Dutch, Indonesian, Chinese, and Indian descent, causing her to feel even more like an outcast when she has no one culture she can directly relate to. This aspect isn't a big part of the pilot or anything, but it's something that I found interesting and something I could definitely see being explored more in future episodes. I mean, at least like one person has to feel represented by this, right? Let's talk about the series' comedy. The humor relies a lot on cringe comedy and dark humor. The series style of humor isn't going to be for everybody, but if you're into that kind of thing, it's executed masterfully here. Watching this pilot for the first time, it felt like I had been reverted back to 2013 watching those early Watamote episodes for the first time. The humor isn't exactly the same. Ongezellig still has its own style, being a lot more zany and exaggerated, with scenes often taking on different animation styles in order to highlight a joke or what the characters are going through. On the topic of animation, it's honestly pretty good, taking on a bit of a mix of Western and Japanese influence, with these anime-inspired designs but more of a cartoony art style and very thick outlines. The show looks like it would air on Nicktoons Network in the mid-2000s. Sure, it might not look as high quality as some indie projects out there, but the animation is still really expressive and surprisingly fluid at times, like they did not need to go this hard. No wonder it took the pilot 5 years to come out. On October 9, 2022, the final part of Ongezellig was released, finishing the 23-minute pilot. After that, Studio Massa went around trying to pitch the project. Unfortunately though, none of these attempts to turn Ongezellig into a series ever seemed to go anywhere. With the views not being anywhere near as high as other big indie projects out there, he was unable to fund the further production of the series. Not helping matters was that the show had gained a surprisingly large audience in Russia of all places, and due to sanctions from the Russo-Ukrainian war, those Russian fans weren't able to donate to Studio Massa's Petchif page, basically the Dutch equivalent of Patreon. Thanks, Putin! He also said that it just felt burnt out after working on the same thing for so long, which, I mean, fair. And on February 6, 2024, it was announced that Ongezellig would not be continuing. It's understandable why the pilot didn't blow up the way many others did. It's much more niche, and really with indie animation becoming more and more common nowadays, it makes it a lot harder for individual projects to really stand out from the crowd, unless it's being made by someone who already has a pre-established audience or prior experience in the animation industry.
Ironic.
I feel the language barrier also played a big part in this. Even though the series has English subtitles when using the closed caption button on YouTube, and unofficial English dubs do exist, the fact that the series isn't in English by default probably played a big part in affecting its overall reach. Had an official English dub been made, I could see the pilot doing better, though I feel like the series' heavy Dutch influence would always hold the series back from reaching a broader audience. It's still kind of depressing though, as this pilot just screams of untapped potential. Despite not getting picked up for a series, Studio Massa still seems to look back on the project fondly, seeing it as a very well done short film, I think that's the best way to look at it as well. Studio Massa is still active on YouTube, uploading videos about Dutch culture and history. Meanwhile, it seems like Ongezellig has been growing a bit more of a reputation as time has gone on. Not to the point where I can see the series continuing or anything, but I've seen more people online talking about the series, with many people seeing it as a sort of hidden gem among the indie animation scene. That makes me really happy. Maybe one day, if the series continues to grow in popularity and Studio Massa recovers from their burnout, we could get some kind of continuation, perhaps in some other medium. I honestly wouldn't mind if the series went down a similar route as Watamoting and continued its story as a comic or something. Studio Massa says he has no plans to do this, claiming that he doesn't think of himself as a good enough cartoonist for something like that, but he has made a few one-off comics centered around the Ongezellig cast, and reading them I think he's just being too hard on himself. They're pretty good. If Ongezellig continued this way, I would be more than satisfied. But even if this is all we get, I can still be happy for what we got. Have you seen Ongezellig? And if so, what do you think of it? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I genuinely want to hear what you all think. And if you like this video, feel free to like it, subscribe, and consider checking out my Patreon if you want to see more videos like it. And as always, have a great day.